Preparations are quietly accelerating in Rome as the next conclave draws near, and a recent development may offer insight into the direction some within the Church intend to take. It has been officially announced that Cardinal Raniero Cantalamessa, a long-time preacher to the papal household, will deliver the sermon to the College of Cardinals inside the Sistine Chapel just before the solemn voting begins. This choice is seen by some as symbolically significant, as Cantalamessa has become known over the years for his impassioned and often unconventional reflections on the gospel. His prominent role at such a crucial moment in church history has sparked debate, though it is far from the only factor shaping this conclave. Beyond the sacred walls of the Vatican, attention is now turning to potential external influences that may be shaping the process before it even formally begins. Reports suggest that intelligence services from several powerful nations have quietly established a presence in Rome. These agents, according to high-level sources, are monitoring developments and may even be seeking to influence the outcome in ways that align with their national interests. While specific governments have not been officially named, the implication is that this activity spans across multiple global powers. In an even more concerning turn, claims have emerged that certain political leaders have engaged directly with cardinal electors. These alleged communications appear aimed at discouraging support for particular candidates viewed as less favorable by secular authorities. Notably, it is said that some of the most traditional-minded candidates, those with strong grassroots support among the faithful, are being singled out. A recent article published by a French outlet, Tribune Création, has intensified the discussion. The piece explores growing speculation around whether the President of France has sought to influence the outcome of the conclave, particularly in relation to the potential candidacy of Cardinal Robert Sarah. The article's headline poses the question, but the content suggests a more assertive narrative: that certain French officials may be attempting to dissuade support for the Guinean cardinal. Cardinal Sarah, who served as prefect of the Congregation for Divine Worship, is known for his deep commitment to the Church's traditional teachings. He has spoken boldly on various issues, including the role of faith in public life and the preservation of Christian identity in an increasingly secular world. His comments on topics such as migration and spiritual integrity have drawn both praise and criticism, depending on the listener's viewpoint. He once described certain interpretations of Scripture used to support modern political agendas as bewitched, a striking term that underscored his passionate defense of orthodoxy. According to Tribune Création, the concern centers on alleged conversations between President Emmanuel Macron and several French cardinal electors. The report claims that Macron expressed unease about the possibility of Cardinal Sarah's election and has attempted to exert influence through diplomatic channels. These allegations raise serious questions about the separation of spiritual discernment and political interference, a boundary historically respected in the conclave process. Further adding to the complexity, the article notes that 5 French cardinals currently hold the right to vote in the upcoming 2025 conclave. Among them is Cardinal Jean-Marc Aveline, the Archbishop of Marseille, who was considered a close theological ally of Pope Francis. His name has also been floated as a potential successor, adding further weight to the political and spiritual calculations now surrounding this pivotal moment. The article also references Cardinal Péter Erdo of Hungary, though a typographical error in some translations mistakenly identified him as Erdogan. Cardinal Erdo, a respected scholar and the Archbishop of Esztergom Budapest, is another figure often mentioned in discussions of possible papal successors. He is associated with a more conservative vision of the Church and has voiced concerns about external pressures on the conclave. As this extraordinary moment unfolds, the future of the Church may rest not only on theological debates, but also on the quiet tensions between national interests and spiritual integrity. The conclave, in its essence, is meant to be a sacred time of discernment, shielded from political influence and guided solely by the Holy Spirit. Yet the events now emerging suggest that the 2025 conclave could be one of the most geopolitically sensitive in modern history. More will unfold as the cardinals begin to arrive and the final days of reflection draw near. The outcome remains uncertain, but the direction is becoming clearer. This is not just a vote for a new leader, but a defining moment that could shape the future of Catholicism for generations. As anticipation builds in Rome, preparations for the upcoming papal conclave are entering a decisive phase. Among the recent developments, one announcement has drawn particular attention. Cardinal Raniero Cantalamessa, the long-serving preacher to the papal household, has been selected to deliver the sermon to the College of Cardinals inside the Sistine Chapel immediately before the solemn voting process begins. His appointment to this significant role at such a pivotal time has been interpreted by many as symbolically meaningful. Over the years, Cardinal Cantalamessa has gained recognition for his spiritually intense and sometimes unconventional homilies, which have sparked both admiration and debate across ecclesial circles. His words, spoken within the sacred walls where the new pontiff will be chosen, are expected to set the tone for reflection among the electors. But while the Church prepares internally for a deeply spiritual decision, developments outside the Vatican walls are raising concern. Sources close to diplomatic and intelligence communities have reported that several global powers may already be monitoring or seeking to subtly influence the conclave's direction. According to these reports, intelligence representatives from influential nations are believed to be stationed in Rome, carefully observing the lead-up to the election. Though no specific countries have been officially named, the presence of these observers suggests a broader interest in the outcome, one that extends beyond purely ecclesiastical affairs. The situation becomes more complex with claims that certain political leaders have gone so far as to initiate direct communication with some cardinal electors. These alleged interventions appear to be aimed at discouraging the support of candidates perceived to be misaligned with secular policy priorities. Particularly, those cardinals who are known for a strong commitment to traditional Catholic teachings are reportedly among those drawing outside scrutiny. One report that has gained attention originates from the French publication Tribune Chrétien. The article explores whether President Emmanuel Macron of France has taken steps to influence the voting process, especially in relation to Cardinal Robert Sarah, a Guinean prelate known for his staunch defense of traditional Catholic values. While the article frames the issue as a question, its content points to a growing narrative that discussions may have occurred between French authorities and cardinal electors, with the aim of limiting support for Cardinal Sarah's potential candidacy. Cardinal Sarah previously served as the prefect of the Congregation for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments. He is widely respected for his theological depth and unwavering support for the spiritual and doctrinal traditions of the Church. His public statements, particularly on the subjects of cultural secularization, faith in public life, and large-scale migration, have positioned him as a prominent figure within more conservative Catholic circles. In one of his more widely discussed remarks, he warned against using Scripture to support policies that, in his view, contradict the spiritual and moral teachings of the Church. The Tribune Chrétien article suggests that President Macron may have voiced concerns about the implications of a Sarah-led papacy, and, allegedly, sought to express this directly to French cardinals eligible to vote. Such a possibility raises a profound issue: the delicate balance between the independence of the Church's spiritual discernment and the involvement, even informal, of secular leadership in that process. Historically, the conclave has stood as a symbol of the Church's autonomy, with the cardinals convening in a sealed environment to discern under divine guidance, free from worldly influence. The idea that political figures could attempt to shape its outcome stands in tension with that sacred tradition. As noted in the report, France currently has 5 cardinals eligible to vote in the upcoming conclave. Among them is Cardinal Jean-Marc Aveline, Archbishop of Marseille, who is considered by many to be theologically aligned with the previous pontificate and viewed as a potential candidate himself. His inclusion in the list of possible successors only underscores how multifaceted the internal dynamics of this election may be. The article also mentions Cardinal Péter Erdo, Archbishop of Esztergom Budapest, a senior church leader from Hungary. A typographical error in some translated versions misidentified him with a similarly named political figure, but Cardinal Erdo remains a serious contender in his own right. Known for his academic background and measured leadership, he has long been associated with a vision of the Church grounded in traditional teachings and pastoral consistency. His reported concerns about external interference echo the broader worries now surfacing in Catholic and secular media alike. As the date of the conclave approaches, it becomes clear that the stakes extend beyond internal church policy. The next pope will not only guide the spiritual direction of over 1 billion Catholics, but will also serve as a global moral voice amid a fractured world stage. Any suggestion that this sacred process is subject to external manipulation, whether overt or subtle, raises ethical, theological, and geopolitical questions. In the coming days, more information will likely surface, but one truth remains. The 2025 conclave is shaping up to be not only a spiritual milestone, but also a moment of global significance. It will test the Church's resolve to preserve its autonomy and challenge the cardinals to act with wisdom, courage, and fidelity to their sacred mission. As the conclave approaches, attention is increasingly turning toward key figures within the Vatican whose past affiliations and political alignments may shape their candidacies. Among them is Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican Secretary of State, who has long been considered one of the most influential figures in church diplomacy. His role in past agreements, including the widely discussed accord with the People's Republic of China, has brought both recognition and scrutiny. To understand Cardinal Parolin's background, some analysts point to his early associations. He has maintained long-standing ties with prominent curial figures, notably Cardinal Marcello Semeraro, who currently serves as prefect of the Dicastery for the Causes of Saints. Semeraro played an integral role in the reforms initiated during the previous pontificate, including his involvement in the preparation of key synods focused on the family and the broader interpretation of Amoris Laetitia, a papal document that emphasized pastoral care and accompaniment in modern family life. Semeraro's circle included figures such as Father Antonio Spadaro, formerly the editor of La Civiltà Cattolica, as well as theologians like Victor Manuel Fernandez and Archbishop Lorenzo Baldessari. These individuals were instrumental in shaping a vision of church reform grounded in the concept of synodality, a framework emphasizing shared decision-making among bishops and laity. In this vision, reform is not merely structural, but intended to be deeply rooted and long-lasting, or as some would describe it, irreversible. One example frequently cited is a 2017 address delivered by Cardinal Parolin at the Catholic University of America in Washington. D.C. observers have noted that sections of that speech closely echoed earlier writings by Cardinal Semeraro, reinforcing the perception that both men share a common vision of Vatican Roman II as a foundation for expansive ecclesial renewal. However, this direction has not been without challenge. During the general congregations that precede the conclave, Cardinal Parolin is expected to face opposition from a number of his peers. Among them are cardinals who have voiced concern about recent events, such as the ongoing trial involving Cardinal Angelo Becciu, and the continued criticism of the Vatican-China agreement, especially from Cardinal Joseph Zen of Hong Kong. That agreement, signed in 2018 and renewed in subsequent years, allowed Chinese authorities a role in the appointment of bishops, a move which, according to critics, poses risks for religious freedom and church independence in the region. Cardinal Parolin's connections extend beyond ecclesial circles. He has worked in parallel with political figures such as Giuseppe Conte, the former Prime Minister of Italy and a leader of the Five Star Movement. Both Parolin and Conte appeared together to promote publications encouraging cultural dialogue, particularly between Italy and the Mediterranean region. During Conte's tenure, Italy pledged support for China's Belt and Road Initiative, a position that was later revised under a new administration. Though some speculate about Cardinal Parolin's potential candidacy for the papacy, there is uncertainty as to whether he can secure the necessary support among the cardinal electors. The election requires a 2/3 majority, and in recent months, another prominent figure has emerged. Cardinal Matteo Zuppi, president of the Italian Episcopal Conference, who commands his own circle of influence within the Church. For those aligned with Cardinal Parolin, however, a secondary strategy may be taking shape. Attention has recently turned to Cardinal Claudio Gugerati, who currently serves as prefect of the Dicastery for the Eastern Churches, and was elevated to the cardinalate in 2023. His ecclesiastical career spans decades of service within the Roman Curia, having entered the Vatican's diplomatic corps in the 1980s. Gugerati, like Parolin, was closely linked to the late Cardinal Achille Silvestrini, a major figure in the post-Vatican Roman II era known for his vision of a more progressive curia. Silvestrini's influence extended through projects such as Villa Nazareth, an academic and spiritual formation initiative in Rome. Both Parolin and Gujarati were deeply involved in this community during their formative years and maintained close ties to Silvestrini's network. These relationships are viewed by some as an enduring legacy of a particular era in Vatican diplomacy, one shaped by collaboration, institutional continuity, and shared theological priorities. Despite his lower public profile, Cardinal Gujarati is well known within church administration, and is considered by some insiders to be a potential consensus candidate, particularly if Parolin's candidacy faces resistance. With decades of experience and an extensive network behind him, Gujarati represents a continuity of vision one that quietly stretches back to the late 20th century and carries the support of long-established ecclesiastical voices. As speculation continues, the possibility of a lesser-known cardinal emerging as a frontrunner remains a topic of discussion among Vatican observers. Some have drawn parallels to previous conclaves where dark horse candidates unexpectedly rose to prominence. Whether or not this will be the case in 2025 remains to be seen, but the evolving dynamics suggest that multiple scenarios are being prepared behind the scenes. The internal politics of a papal conclave can often rival and even surpass the complexity of secular elections. Yet, unlike political campaigns, the true deliberations remain shielded from public view, shaped in silence, prayer, and discernment. The Church's future, however, may be significantly influenced by these hidden dynamics, and the individuals whose paths have long been intertwined within the halls of the Vatican. While most aspects of a papal conclave are conducted with great discretion and formal restraint, recent developments suggest that, in some circles, a more direct and urgent tone is emerging. Traditionally, discussions around papal succession are cloaked in careful language and guarded diplomacy. However, a recent letter that has surfaced is drawing attention for its unprecedented boldness. The letter in question was penned by Professor Joseph Seifert, a respected lay theologian known for his work in the field of Catholic philosophy and ethics. Addressed to Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re, Dean of the College of Cardinals, the letter makes a formal appeal for an investigation into theological concerns that have circulated in some quarters of the Church in recent years. Specifically, Seifert calls for the examination of accusations originally raised by Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, which challenge aspects of Pope Francis's teachings. In the letter, Professor Seifert emphasizes that the issue at hand is not about investigating the individual who raised the claims, but rather the claims themselves. He references historical church documents that address the complex and rarely discussed issue of doctrinal integrity among church leaders. According to Seifert, these documents, some of which originate from previous pontiffs, raise the possibility that any canonical errors made under a compromised pontificate could have lasting implications, including on matters such as appointments to the College of Cardinals. The letter appeals directly to Cardinal Re and to the Camerlengo, Cardinal Kevin Farrell, who together hold key responsibilities during the sede vacante, the period between the death of one pope and the election of another. Seifert argues that, given their current authority, these two cardinals are uniquely positioned to initiate a formal inquiry before the next conclave begins. This public letter, which Seifert has made open due to the urgency of timing, frames the request as a matter of safeguarding the integrity of the electoral process. He asserts that the forthcoming conclave, scheduled to include over 100 cardinal electors appointed during the Francis pontificate, could risk canonical complications if unresolved questions persist regarding the legitimacy of those appointments. In his appeal, Professor Seifert references several historic papal decrees, including those by Pope Paul Roman IV and St. Pius V, which addressed the theological and canonical status of bishops and cardinals in cases involving formal doctrinal error. According to Seifert, these texts suggest that under specific circumstances, the authority of individuals elevated to office during such times could be called into question. It is important to note that this letter does not represent an official position of the Vatican or the majority of the cardinal electors. Rather, it illustrates the heightened tension and spiritual urgency felt by some within the global Catholic community. While the mainstream process of the conclave remains rooted in tradition, prayer, and discernment, voices like Seifert's demonstrate that behind the formality lies a deep undercurrent of theological concern, historical reference, and desire for clarity. The inclusion of Cardinal Farrell in this discussion is also significant. As Camerlengo, he oversees many of the logistical aspects of the interregnum, from papal funerals to the preparation of the Sistine Chapel for the voting process. Together with the Cardinal Dean, he holds the responsibility of convening the cardinal electors and initiating the conclave. Thus, any public appeal directed toward them carries particular symbolic weight. Professor Seyfert's letter has sparked renewed attention to the broader conversation about the relationship between doctrine and authority in the Church, especially in times of transition. His words do not claim to determine outcomes, but they do seek to raise questions that, in his view, deserve thoughtful consideration before the cardinals enter into one of the most solemn and spiritually significant decisions in the life of the Church. As the date of the conclave draws closer, many eyes remain focused not only on who may be chosen as the next pope, but also on the integrity of the process itself. From theological scholars to everyday believers, this moment in Church history is prompting reflection on the timeless responsibilities entrusted to the men who will soon cast their votes beneath Michelangelo's frescoes. What remains certain is that the stakes are high and the weight of tradition, history, and faith hangs heavy over Rome. Within the ongoing discourse surrounding the upcoming conclave, a newly surfaced open letter has stirred further discussion among scholars and observers of church affairs. The letter, written by Professor Joseph Seyfert, raises theological concerns that, in his view, merit formal consideration before the next papal election takes place. Seyfert refers to several historic church documents, particularly those issued by Pope Paul Roman IV and Pope St. Pius V, which discuss the implications of doctrinal error among high-ranking church officials. According to these sources, which were written during eras of intense theological debate, any individual who publicly adheres to heretical beliefs may lose their claim to legitimate authority within the Church, even if they have been elevated to high office. The professor's appeal is rooted in his interpretation of these texts and their relevance to the present moment. In his letter, Seyfert expresses the view that, rather than dismissing allegations made in recent years, the Church should first examine them through a proper canonical process. He suggests that excommunications issued against individuals who raised these questions may have been premature without an impartial investigation. He argues that the Church owes clarity to the faithful and to those affected by the disciplinary actions, not as a judgment against any person, but as a matter of fidelity to long-standing ecclesiastical principles. Central to his argument is the concern that if a reigning pope were ever found to have held theological positions inconsistent with defined doctrine, either before, during, or after assuming the papacy, the legitimacy of the appointments made under that pontificate could, according to these historical documents, be questioned. This includes nominations to the College of Cardinals. In such a case, Seyfert asserts that those cardinals might not be eligible to participate in a future conclave, potentially affecting the outcome of the election itself. He further notes that the composition of the current College of Cardinals has been significantly shaped by recent papal appointments. More than 100 voting members were created during the most recent pontificate. If their eligibility were to be challenged hypothetically, the number of valid electors could dramatically shift, altering the entire conclave. For that reason, Seyfert argues, any such theological concerns should be addressed prior to the start of the conclave to avoid casting doubt on the validity of its result. He also raises related questions, such as whether changes made to the procedures governing papal elections by recent popes are themselves subject to review if the legitimacy of the pontificate is under question. These include alterations to conclave rules originally decreed by Pope St. John Paul II. In addition, Seyfert refers to historical decrees that called for the removal of writings and decisions made by popes found to be in doctrinal error. He notes that, according to the same documents, these measures were established in perpetuity to protect the consistency and sanctity of church teaching. Whether these older decrees still hold canonical force is a matter of debate, but Seyfert cites them as part of his rationale for urging action. Addressing his appeal to Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re, the current Dean of the College of Cardinals, and to Cardinal Kevin Farrell, the Camerlengo, Seyfert emphasizes that during the sede vacante, the time between papal reigns, these two cardinals hold particular administrative authority. According to him, they possess the ability to initiate a preliminary investigation or consultation on the matter, relying on a jury composed of cardinals appointed prior to the most recent pontificate. Seifert frames his appeal as a humble request made in the interest of clarity and unity. He asks the cardinal dean to consider the historical precedent set by earlier popes and to act, if deemed appropriate, before the next conclave commences. In his words, this would be a moment of significant weight for the Church, one that calls for wisdom, discernment, and respect for both tradition and the present needs of the faithful. It is important to note that Seifert's letter reflects a personal theological position and is not an official action of the Church. The Vatican has not responded publicly to the letter, and there is no indication that a formal investigation is underway. Nonetheless, the document has sparked conversations among canon law scholars, theologians, and observers about how the Church navigates questions of authority, doctrine, and legitimacy during moments of transition. As the Church prepares for one of its most solemn and sacred acts, the election of a new pope, voices from various sectors of Catholic life continue to speak out, each hoping to safeguard the integrity of the process in their own way. In the end, the conclave remains not only a gathering of cardinals, but a moment of global spiritual reflection, a time when the Church turns inward in prayer, seeking guidance for its future from the highest source. In a continuation of the public letter addressed to Church leadership, Professor Joseph Seifert draws a powerful historical parallel, invoking the example of Saint Athanasius, a revered figure of early Christianity who, as a young deacon, stood firm during the Arian controversy. Athanasius was famously exiled multiple times for his unwavering commitment to the divinity of Christ during an era when parts of the Church hierarchy wavered. Seifert references this precedent to underline his belief that moments of great theological confusion call for clarity and bold action rooted in fidelity to the faith. In his appeal, Seifert argues that the present theological challenges facing the Church, especially those involving recent statements and symbolic acts, warrant a thorough and impartial review before the upcoming conclave begins. Among the issues cited are interpretations of interreligious dialogue, notably the widely discussed Abu Dhabi Declaration, which states that the diversity of religions is willed by God. This statement has been the subject of intense debate, as some theologians seek to understand its meaning within the broader context of Catholic doctrine. Seifert also references past events, such as the controversial use of certain indigenous symbols during Vatican ceremonies, which for some observers raised questions about the boundaries between inculturation and syncretism. These concerns, he writes, contribute to a broader perception of uncertainty regarding doctrinal continuity. In Seifert's view, such moments should be met not with silence, but with formal discernment, both to honor the legacy of the Church and to preserve its clarity for future generations. He emphasizes that his request is not an act of rebellion, but rather what he describes as a gesture of profound concern and love for the Church. In his words, such an investigation would not be aimed at judgment or condemnation, but at safeguarding truth and offering clarity not just for the faithful today, but for the integrity of Catholic teaching in generations to come. Seifert suggests that a formal review of specific theological positions attributed to the late Pope Francis, if deemed inconsistent with Church tradition, could help the Church discern the appropriate pastoral and doctrinal path forward. He references historical teachings by Pope Paul Roman IV and Saint Pius V, which held that errors in faith expressed by a pope, if proven, could have significant canonical implications, particularly in relation to appointments and papal documents. He goes further to argue that if such an investigation were to affirm the presence of doctrinal errors, then additional measures might be required to address their influence within the magisterial texts, academic instruction, and broader Church life. Among the areas he names are interpretations of the apostolic exhortation Amoris Laetitia, private theological remarks on topics such as the nature of hell, and the aforementioned declarations on interfaith coexistence. Of special concern to Seifert is the enduring impact that controversial formulations could have on seminaries and catechetical instruction around the world. He warns that unless theological inconsistencies, if verified, are corrected, they may become embedded in the formation of future priests and bishops, potentially causing confusion among the faithful about the nature of Church doctrine on core issues such as salvation, sin, and divine judgment. He concludes his appeal with the belief that such an action, while complex and sensitive, would ultimately serve not only the memory of Pope Francis, but also the spiritual integrity of the Church itself. A transparent examination, he suggests, could help ensure that the Church's magisterium remains united, consistent, and clearly rooted in the apostolic faith. While this letter represents a deeply felt appeal from one theologian, it also highlights the continuing challenges faced by the Church in times of doctrinal and pastoral tension. It reminds the global Catholic community of the ongoing task to reconcile unity with truth, compassion with clarity, and tradition with the call to evangelize in a rapidly changing world. At present, no formal process addressing these specific claims has been announced by the Vatican. However, the emergence of this letter and the questions it raises are now part of the broader landscape in which the next conclave will unfold. As cardinals prepare to enter into prayer and deliberation, the path ahead remains one not only of leadership selection, but of discernment for the future of Catholicism itself. As the open letter from Professor Joseph Seyfert continues to circulate, it draws upon a powerful moment in Church history to frame its message. Seyfert recalls the courage of Saint Athanasius, a foundational figure of early Christianity who, even as a young deacon, became a leading voice against the Arian heresy, which questioned the divinity of Christ. Despite facing exile and opposition from within the Church itself, Athanasius remained steadfast, helping to shape the eventual theological response that affirmed core Christian beliefs. Through this reference, Seyfert suggests that times of doctrinal confusion require not passivity, but conviction rooted in fidelity to the truth. In his letter, Seyfert raises a number of theological and doctrinal issues that, in his view, deserve open and careful examination before the upcoming conclave. Central to his concerns is the interpretation of interreligious dialogue, particularly the Abu Dhabi Declaration, which includes the statement that the diversity of religions is willed by God. This phrase has prompted varying interpretations, and Seyfert argues that its implications for Catholic doctrine should be clearly addressed. He also mentions prior Vatican events involving symbolic gestures and rituals that, to some observers, blurred the line between cultural engagement and syncretism. These moments, he writes, have added to a growing sense of uncertainty among many believers about the continuity of the Church's teachings. For this reason, he calls for a formal and fair theological review, not as an act of division, but to clarify doctrine for the sake of the Church's future. Seyfert carefully notes that his appeal is not an accusation or act of rebellion, but one of deep concern for the Church's mission and identity. He describes it as a call to discernment to distinguish clearly what belongs to the faith from what may risk misunderstanding or misapplication. Such clarity, he suggests, is not only essential for Church leaders today, but also for the generations of clergy, teachers, and faithful yet to come. Among the issues he believes warrant examination are certain doctrinal interpretations attributed to the late Pope Francis, particularly around pastoral documents, theological remarks, and public declarations. He references historical teachings from Pope Paul Roman IV and Saint Pius V, which established guidelines for addressing the possibility of doctrinal error among high-ranking officials. In these earlier papal decrees, Seyfert finds a precedent for considering how such matters might be handled within a formal ecclesiastical framework. He further argues that if an inquiry were to determine that doctrinal inconsistencies had occurred, the Church might need to take steps to review how these teachings are presented in official documents and seminary curricula. Without such review, he suggests, theological confusion could unintentionally spread through educational institutions and formation programs, ultimately impacting the clarity of Catholic teaching on salvation, divine judgment, and the uniqueness of the Christian faith. In his conclusion, Seyfert expresses the view that this kind of discernment, while complex and delicate, could offer a profound service to the Church. It would not only clarify the record, but also protect the spiritual unity of the faithful. In his words, this is an opportunity not to look backward in judgment, but forward in hope, affirming once again the Church's commitment to truth, tradition, and the gospel of Jesus Christ. At this time, no official response has been issued regarding the letter or its proposals. The Vatican has not indicated any plan to investigate the concerns raised. Still, The letter has sparked widespread attention and reflection across theological and ecclesial circles. As the next conclave approaches, the conversation surrounding these topics continues to grow not just among cardinals, but among clergy, scholars, and lay Catholics alike. In the days to come, the College of Cardinals will gather in Rome, not only to choose the next successor to St. Peter, but to reflect deeply on the direction of the Church in the decades ahead. And while the future remains uncertain, one thing is clear. The faithful around the world are watching, praying for a shepherd who will lead with courage, wisdom, and fidelity in a time of great spiritual importance. As the world awaits the next conclave, Catholics everywhere are being called not to fear, but to pray. The selection of a new pope is not merely a moment of decision, it is a moment of profound spiritual responsibility. The College of Cardinals, entrusted with this sacred task, must seek not popularity or political compromise, but the will of God to choose a shepherd who will uphold the faith, defend truth, and guide the Church through times of uncertainty with clarity and conviction. In these days of reflection, believers are invited to set aside anxiety and instead lift their hearts in prayer for wisdom, for courage, and for fidelity among those chosen to elect the next successor of Peter. The hope is for a leader who will not only continue the mission of the Church, but who will also illuminate the fullness of Catholic truth in a world clouded by confusion. Throughout history, the red garments of the cardinals have symbolized their willingness to give their lives for the gospel. It is a color that speaks of sacrifice, of courage, and of unwavering commitment. Yet in every generation, the test remains. Will those who carry that symbol live up to its meaning? Will they speak with boldness when silence is tempting? Will they defend the faith even when it costs everything? This is a time to remember those who came before the saints, the martyrs, the confessors who bore witness to truth at great personal cost. Their legacy challenges today's leaders not only to maintain unity, but to hold fast to the faith that was handed down through the apostles. One initiative gaining quiet momentum is a novena for the conclave, a spiritual offering of prayer over 9 days, inviting the faithful to intercede for divine guidance in the days leading up to the election. Even if one has not begun from the start, there is no wrong time to begin. Each prayer, no matter when it is offered, joins with countless others across the globe in a chorus of hope and trust. There are many possibilities ahead. Some anticipate a continuation of the previous direction, reform through new leadership. Others hope for a return to traditional structures and clarity. And some wonder whether the next pope may take a quieter path, seeking to restore calm and unity without dramatic change. Whatever the outcome, this moment in history is a unique one that may shape the course of the Church for decades to come. As the cardinals prepare to enter the Sistine Chapel, may every voice that prays, every heart that hopes, and every soul that longs for truth be united in one intention: that the next pope will be a man after God's own heart, strong in faith, rooted in tradition, and guided by the Holy Spirit. As Rome prepares to close one chapter and open another, the world watches with a mixture of anticipation and unease. Inside the walls of the Vatican, beneath the frescoes of the Sistine Chapel, a sacred silence will soon fall, a silence where human voices give way to whispered prayers, where decisions are made not in haste, but in hope. Yet outside those walls, billions wait, not only Catholics, but leaders, seekers, and observers who understand that what happens here may ripple far beyond the Church itself. This conclave is more than a transition of office. It is a test of vision, of fidelity, and of the Church's ability to walk the narrow path between compassion and conviction, mercy and truth. The cardinals carry not just titles, but the burden of memory of saints who suffered for doctrine, of faithful who lived and died believing the Church would never lose its voice. And now, as they enter that sacred room, they are tasked with hearing that voice again. There are those who fear division, and others who fear compromise. But the deeper fear, often unspoken, is that the Church might lose its sense of identity. That in trying to please too many, it might forget who it truly is. This is why the choice of the next pope matters so deeply. It is not about charisma or change. It is about communion with Christ, with tradition, and with the people of God. In recent years, the Church has faced not only external challenges, but internal storms, questions about doctrine, about leadership, about the very nature of truth in a world of noise. The next pope will inherit all of this. And yet, he will also inherit something greater: the prayers of the faithful, the legacy of saints, and the unbreakable promise that the gates of hell shall not prevail. There is a temptation in every age to believe that this moment is the most important, the most urgent, the most fragile. But perhaps what makes this moment so critical is not its drama, but its direction. For the Church does not move in circles. It moves forward slowly, humbly, but always forward. And the one chosen to lead it must be ready to bear the weight of that journey. Whether known or unknown, young or old, reformer or restorer, the man who will emerge on that balcony will not stand there alone. He will carry with him the silent hopes of a billion hearts. He will carry the expectations of a world longing for peace. And above all, he will carry the cross not as a symbol of status, but as a sign of service. And so, as the faithful continue their prayers from candlelit chapels to busy city streets, the Church once again entrusts its future to the mystery of God's providence. The outcome is not ours to control, but the prayer is ours to offer. For the soul of the Church, for the light of the nations, and for the glory of God, may the right shepherd be chosen.